Final Fantasy II came out in 1991 for the Super Nintendo. In it, we play as a dark knight named Cecil, who finds himself invading the peaceful village of Mysidia to claim and steal the magical crystal that, What? What are you talking about? This is clearly Final Fantasy II, the second game in the series. What do you mean this is number 4? But I want to play this one! I love this game! Fine. Okay, this isn't the game I'm going to be talking about. The real Final Fantasy II was a game on the Famicom released in 1988. Hey, my birth year! So here's what happened. Final Fantasy I reached North America in 1990, despite the fact that it had come out 3 years earlier in 1987. By the time FF1 reached international shores, Square had actually released both Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy III. The Super Nintendo had just arrived, and Square didn't really see the point in localizing the last two games when they could just focus on the current game, Final Fantasy IV. So, to keep continuity, Final Fantasy IV became Final Fantasy II everywhere else. The series definitely has a bit of name confusion. You may confuse people when you talk about Final Fantasy II or Final Fantasy III. Anywho, this game would take a really long time to get a proper localization. For more than a decade, international Square fans would never experience the first true sequel until just after Final Fantasy X had come out on the PlayStation 2. Because finally, on April 8, 2003, Square would remake and re-release the first two games to us Canadians and call it Final Fantasy Origins. The back of the box even specifically mentions that while one had come out on the NES, this would be the first time that number 2 was ever available. So this is the version I chose to play. I am aware that on the internet I could easily find a translated ROM of the original Famicom release, that if I wanted to, I could play through the 8-bit version and experience its sprites and music the way Japan did back in 1988. But this retrospective is about my experience with the franchise, being Canadian and buying Origins the way it was packaged to me. I'm not interested in covering unofficial releases. If Square themselves had translated the game and released it on Virtual Console for the Wii, maybe I would have played that. But they didn't, so I'm going with my first exposure and playing the PlayStation game. So our story begins in the kingdom of Palamecia, where an evil emperor uses dark magic to summon forth a portal to hell and calls in numerous demons and monsters to fight by his side and help conquer the world. Why? He was bored. So the Palamecian Empire starts invading numerous cities, eventually affecting the Kingdom of Fynn, which organizes a rebel alliance to fight back against the Emperor. But he doesn't take that too kindly, so he declares war on Fynn and forces the royal family to retreat, with the king getting mortally wounded in the process. He got hit in the back with an arrow. At least it wasn't his knee! Ah! Sorry, I know, it's a terrible joke, Jesus! Enter our 4 protagonists who are just normal teenagers living their lives in the city of Fynn when a whole bunch of assholes start destroying everything. And the PlayStation version actually features an opening cutscene showing the 4 characters' escape. Perhaps you'd like to be a pupil of mine? I'd stick my neck out for you! All they can do is watch as everything they've grown to love is being conquered by darkness. Unfortunately, the knights catch up to them and we have our first battle. And it ends horribly. Jesus Christ, the difficulty's a little high, don't you think? But don't worry, they're not dead. Princess Hilda of Fynn stumbles upon their bodies during the escape and enlists the help of the White Wizard Mindu to bring them back from the brink of death. Unfortunately, one of the heroes, Leon, was nowhere to be seen when Hilda found them. So, our 3 heroes decide not to cower and run, but instead to join the resistance and fight for the Rebel Alliance. And that sets up Final Fantasy II. So, you may have noticed no mention of Canaria or the 4 orbs that give all life to the planet, and we're not playing as the Warriors of Light. Final Fantasy II would set the trend for every game to come of completely starting from scratch. New world, new characters, and most important of all, a completely new battle system which doesn't level up the way it did the last game. And that's a really ballsy move if I do say so myself. Square just avoided bankruptcy by releasing this hit video game that everybody loves, and then they decided that for the sequel, Let's just change everything players know and make them learn a completely new setup. Square took a gamble. Does it pay off? I personally don't think so. So I just want to state before I get deep into the criticism of this game, I love the Final Fantasy franchise. I wouldn't be doing this retrospective if I didn't. And if you're a fan of the franchise who doesn't usually watch my channel, I promise I'm not super nitpicky and I never go out of my way to hate these games. Most of the games on this list I like. There's only 3 of the 18 games I'm going to cover that I think are bad. Only 3 of which I find really frustrating and annoying and never really wanted to go back and play again. And unfortunately, number 2 is one of those 3. If you like this game, by all means, share your love in the comments, but me? Hoo boy, I remembered why I don't come back to this one. I played it back in 2003 when the PlayStation version arrived, and I remember not thinking much of it. Like, I don't hate it, but it's really, really frustrating to play, you know? For every good thing that I really like, there's like 2 more things that drive me bonkers. But let's get into the meat and potatoes. So at first you get your 4 main characters, Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon. And if you don't like their names, you have the option to change them at the startup screen. As long as it's 6 letters long. God damn these video games and their 6-letter limits, just let me have Clement, god damn it. Although I'll warn you right now, don't count on Leon joining the party for a very, very, very long time. You're mostly going to be controlling 3 characters, and every now and then you get a 4th party member who joins you momentarily until they get switched out with another one. And kind of like Final Fantasy I, there's no limit to what your 4 main characters can be. If you want Firion to focus entirely on strength and armor and combat like a warrior class, go ahead. If you want Maria to be the white mage and heal your party and bring people back from the dead, by all means! You can customize the fighters to be skilled in whatever weapon you equip them, to learn whatever black magic you collect, and to become whatever you want them to be. They can be one thing, they can be multiple things, they can be everything. You have that freedom. The only problem with trying to make a character everything, or just some things, is that it takes a really, really, really long time. All because of the new level up system, or rather, the lack thereof. See, instead of having enemies give experience and characters advancing in stats with each level up, Final Fantasy II goes with a more authentic experience system. The nurture versus nature approach. You don't get experience, you don't have levels, but the more you do a particular action, the better at that action you will be. So, for example, if you attack a monster with a weapon, and then you keep attacking monsters with weapons, your strength will eventually increase. You'll win the battle and the game will tell you that you are stronger for doing what you did. If you're casting the fire spell a lot and burning enemies with black magic, your intelligence will increase and you'll become a lot more capable at casting fire. So you level up your magic spells and increase their damage, turning Fire 1 into Fire 2, then Fire 3, then Fire 4, until it eventually maxes out at Fire 16. And when it comes to defense and health, you're encouraged to get hit by enemies, because the more you take damage, the higher your max HP will grow. You actually want your character to get beaten up so that they can grow their endurance and take more damage later. It's not a terrible concept. The more you do something, the better you get at it. You know, like real life experience. You will need to consult the instruction book to see what affects what, and I'm certainly not hot about every choice. Like agility. The ability to flee from battles is tied to this, and when you're on the edge of defeat, you don't want to fight monsters, you just want to get away. But how do you increase it? By getting targeted by enemies with physical attacks. Huh? Do I have to miss, or do they have to hit me? Either way, I went through most of the playthrough barely building this up, despite my attempts to increase my health. And I could never run from battles effectively. More on that later. Your stats max out at 99, and your abilities and weapon proficiencies max out at 16. So hey, you only have to attack 1,600 times with the fire spell to max it out. 1,600 animations to watch. If you want everyone to be good healers, and have black magic for enemies, and be strong with a particular weapon, get ready to grind your ass off. Oh God, I never commented on the grinding with Final Fantasy I. Honestly, I didn't mind. I spent like 3 to 5 hours a day playing FF1, and I felt there was no challenge I really needed to grind for. The new weapons and armor you found in dungeons made the experience perfectly comfortable. I didn't often run in Final Fantasy I, so I leveled up naturally, and grinding is just something you get used to with RPGs. Sometimes you're going to be fighting things again and again and again until your stats grow. If you can't get into that, you're probably not going to like RPGs in general. But Final Fantasy II, you can't be a competent force in the game unless you grind. Nothing is convenient unless you grind, and what a grind it truly is. Anyone who complains about the draw system in Final Fantasy VIII has not played this. In order to level up just one spell, to turn a simple Ice 1 into an Ice 2, you must cast the spell at least 50 to 100 times. For one level up! And in case you're wondering how long it takes to cast just one spell with 4 characters, well, let's roll the footage! Now okay, Clement, that's just one spell. They don't need to learn everything. No, but they do need a variety when items are so expensive. There's tons of new items in the shop, introduced with Final Fantasy II. This game is the first to introduce the Magic Points system, or MP for short. So there are items that can refill MP, like ethers. Ethers are great when you're in the middle of a dungeon and you can't get back to town, but you wasted too much magic while you were down there. So how much are they? Whoa, 2,500 gil? That's expensive as hell! And by the time you start making enough money that ethers are cheap, it only refills less than about 40 MP. I have spells that cost 8 to 10 MP, and I only get 4 more opportunities after spending 2,000 gil? What are you, high? That doesn't help, and that doesn't feel balanced at all. Okay, that was an ether, but they introduced the Phoenix Down in Final Fantasy II. When your characters die, you can still bring them to a church to revive them, but if you don't want to head back to town, you can now buy these items to bring them back during battles. And it's 5,000 gil. Oh my god, holy Moses. You're better off buying the life spell, which is only 1,500 gil, and can reliably bring people back at its lowest state. But, unlike a Phoenix Down, you'll need to grind the life spell if you want it to bring people back to life with more than just 1 HP. It's not that great when you bring someone back and then an enemy just kills them instantly before you could heal them. So you gotta grind and cast the life spell over and over and over again. Final Fantasy II's enemies don't drop scripted gil. I mean, they do drop more the harder the game gets, but it's always inconsistent what enemies will drop. You can fight 4 goblins one time and get less gil than the next time you fight 4 goblins. Hell, at the beginning of the game, you have to grind at least 10 battles just to get 400 gil so that you can buy 1 magic tome. I want Firion to cast fire? Fight 10 battles. I want Maria to learn ice? Fight another 10. Guy needs lightning? Fight another 10. I just spent 30 battles getting 3 of these things in the early game. And these are some of the cheaper spells, too. Everything's too expensive. You're always dirt poor, and by the time you start fighting enemies who bring in the big bucks, you're never buying anything anymore. I guess you could use it to buy elixirs, but you gotta keep in mind your inventory. You know how in Final Fantasy I you could carry 99 heal potions and 99 tents and stuff? Well, Final Fantasy II makes 1 item bag for everything, meaning you can now carry more than 16 armors, but that's out of 63 inventory spaces, which share a piece with weapons, key items, potions, accessories, and the like. So you can't carry 99 of anything, and every now and then after a battle, or when you open a chest, you'll be over-encumbered and have to drop something. So that's a thing. Anywho, let's just talk about the structure of the game. Firion and his friends enlist to help take the fight to the Empire, which means doing a lot of tasks for Princess Hilda and the rebels. The game usually has you coming back to the rebel base in the village of Altair. You usually have to consult Hilda, the White Wizard Mindu, or the Wounded King for information in order to learn what to do next. Final Fantasy II actually has this interesting keyword system where a character will mention a specific subject that is highlighted a different color in the text and plays a little sound when they mention it. So, as the player, when you hear new keywords in conversations, you can memorize those words and use them for any conversation that lets you ask about things. So Hilda tells you the secret code word of the rebels is the Wild Rose. So you can find certain NPCs and actually ask them about the Wild Rose to see if you can get any new information about things. Not every person knows every subject, however, so when they don't know what you're talking about, they'll just throw up a question mark. Every time you return to Altair, it's super important to talk to every NPC in the rebel base. You never know when the king or Mindu or whoever can give you a word that's needed to finish the story. So Hilda sends the group off to find soldiers, sabotage Imperial aircrafts, and investigate dangerous dungeons for special weapons that will give them the edge. So you get directions, travel the overworld, get into random encounters with monsters, grow your stats, you explore dungeons, open treasure chests to find money and gear, and occasionally face off with some kind of boss that the Empire's got. And you're usually gaining new party members to fill the 4th slot until you eventually reunite with Leon. It's basically the same thing as FF1, except imagine you're constantly returning to Conaria in between each story bit. The world map is actually one big connected piece of land where you can walk from one city to the other. Well, as long as you have a canoe, but Mindu gives you one of those really early. And this leads to the first issue players will have if they try to explore. I mean, one of the first things you do is sneak back into the kingdom of Finn to find Hilda's fiancé. And Finn is really close to an area that is way more dangerous than the game warns you. Like, from the opening city Altair, you can go too far low and too far high, and find yourself being attacked by monsters way outside your comfort zone. So imagine grinding a few battles, it's your first time playing, so you want to explore the world map. Maybe there's a hidden cave with treasure around. Maybe there's a town with great shops that I can discover. Or maybe I'll get into a random encounter, run into something I can't hurt at all, which murders you in one damn hit. Oh, and I tried to run, but my agility is super low. Oops! 16 minutes of gameplay wasted, gotta reload my last save because the game didn't warn me that enemies could get way more dangerous the farther I walk. Like, put up a fence or something, I don't know. You never had this issue in the last game because you never went to a new area without getting a new vehicle or blowing up a mountain with TNT or something. But again, FF2's map is super open from the get-go, and it actively punishes you for being curious. Curiosity kills the cat quite often. Like when you return to Finn, the kingdom is crawling with Imperial Knights. And you know, I thought I could talk to them because maybe they'd have dialogue that shows me how oppressive the Empire really is. Oh, they're oppressive, because the second you talk to them, they immediately fight you and are so overpowered they murder you instantly. And again, couldn't run away because my agility sucks. I fell for this twice because at one point you trick a guard on their dreadnought airship to let you on board because you have a pass. I'm not wearing a disguise or anything, so clearly they don't care. I figured I have a pass, they'll talk to me, right? And no, you talk to the Imperials on the dreadnought and they still murder you. So pro tip, do not talk to any of your enemies. Another way curiosity can get the better of you is when you're opening treasure chests. Final Fantasy II is the first game that features monsters in a box, so when you open particular treasure chests, you might get ambushed by a foe who's usually stronger than the random encounters outside of this fight. And sometimes these monster boxes are super deep into dungeons that dying to them can really make you go back and redo a lot of progress. Which takes us to the boss fights. This is the only Final Fantasy I can think of that gives you bosses with absurd physical defense that turn most battles into a lucky crapshoot. Like, if I go through a dungeon and I can kill all the monsters and win every fight and be able to reach the boss with relative ease, then they probably shouldn't be a huge brick wall when I actually fight them, right? But no. The Clement Falls Mine boss, sometimes you hit him and deal damage, and sometimes you just score a 0. And the next boss I score 0s. And the next boss I score 0s. Every boss in this game has high physical defense that either expects me to grind, or it expects me to use magic for attacking and buffing. And even when I reached Castle Cassion, I made it to one boss who absorbs magical attacks and converts it into health. And that made the fight way more tense because I couldn't score much of anything but 0s for most of the fight. And again, I was killing everything in Castle Cassion, so I should have been strong enough to do way better than that. This is a weird balancing issue that doesn't make sense to me. And the buffing spells needed to help with boss fights don't arrive for a while. You can't buy the Aura or Berserk spells in any of the early towns. It's a drop from certain enemies that don't show up until much later. So then, why are the early bosses so physically strong? I know Square released this game like a year after the last one, but even then, shouldn't they have seen these obvious flaws in testing? But guys, the real issue with dungeon crawling, and what really pissed me off during the playthrough, was the random encounter rate. Pay attention to this footage where I cut out all the battles. I played the NES FF1 last month, and it was actually decent. You were allowed to walk pretty good distances between fights, and I never got disoriented with the layout of the maps and forgot where I was going, and had to regain my bearings because it was all good. No issues. I can tolerate random encounters when they don't go too far. Now, I can't speak for the original Famicom release of Final Fantasy II, or the Game Boy Advance one, or even the PSP version, but the PlayStation version of Final Fantasy II is unbearable. Absolutely unbearable. I mean, this is one of those games where you literally get out of a battle, take 3 steps, and immediately run into another fight. The dungeons in Final Fantasy II are way too big. They're much bigger than the ones in the first game, and so many of the doors in these dungeons lead to complete dead ends. Like, every dungeon usually has numerous pathways which lead to a door, and when you go inside, there's nothing inside this room. Nothing at all. It's just a square, empty space. So you try to leave this room, and 90% of the time you have to fight a battle before you can leave. It's not my imagination either. These rooms are just battle traps that always force you to fight something. I mean, some of these places are like 10 floors long. 10 giant open spaces with lots of winding hallways where you're going to have like 10 battles per floor, and because you can't save the game in the middle of a dungeon, you have to dedicate like an hour's worth of your time just going from the start to the end of it. An hour's worth of walking and battling and dead ends and frustration because most of the hour is fighting enemies that you can't run away from, again because of my shitty agility. You start to lose track of where you were going and where you've already been, and all you can see is that blinding whirlwind that happens again and again and again. It drove me bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. I felt like I was going insane in these dungeons. Again, I love the series. Most of these problems aren't in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., but it's hard to ignore such faults. I don't like switching out the 4th main character all the time. I mean, the first 2 you get are really good. You have the White Wizard Mindu, who has an exceptional list of spells that helps so much during the early game. And then there's the monk Joseph. He fights unarmed, and his Fists of Fury rake in a lot of damage for when you recruit him. Easily capable of taking giant adamantoises and treacherous Imperial generals like a champ. But then he gets crushed by a boulder. The other 4 characters don't have any standout benefits. Gordon's a weenie with no magic, and since his best proficiency with weapons is the lance, you're just going to equip lances to the guy. You could teach him Cure Magic, but keep in mind, my trio have had Cure Magic long before he joined up, and his magic will be at level 1, and his MP is small, so you have to take time to make him a competent magic user. But he's temporary, so why bother? And then you get similar things with the Pirate Layla and the Dragoon Gareth. Yeah, buddy. Layla has no magic, specializes in daggers, and Gareth has no magic, specializes in swords. That's it. If you're familiar with the franchise, you'd say, wait, doesn't the Dragoon use spears? And can't he use the jump feature? Nope, not in this game. And by the time you get these extra party members, they're so underleveled compared to what you are. I spent time raising my stats, and the guest party members just feel like they're out of my league. Maybe if they were proportionate to what you were when they joined the party, it wouldn't suck so much. As for the final party member, and the guy you've been looking for since the whole adventure, Leon doesn't join the party until just before the final dungeon in the game. I'm serious, it takes until you're at the end for him to arrive, and while he's proficient in tons of weapons, he has no magic, whereas my team has spent hours mastering theirs and have magic spells in the 10s and 11s. Leon, what the hell? The other thing that sucks about guest party members is that they can't be exploited the way the main trio can either. See, the original Famicom version and the PlayStation version have this fun little quirk where, as long as you issue the command to do something in a battle, that counts as having done the command. But you can always cancel when you're deciding the next teammate's attack, and despite not doing the thing you plan to do, the game still thinks you did. So, thank God for the game's memory config feature and the ability to just hold X to activate commands, because after a while you get bored with this game and you want to speed it up, so I used the exploit to increase some spells as quickly as possible. And this is still a long, tedious process you have to dedicate time to, by the way. But you can't change the order of characters, and when you select the fourth party member's abilities, it immediately goes into the fight. So this exploit only works well for the first 3 characters. And like I said earlier, this is for the Famicom and PlayStation versions. Because Square thought it was a glaring issue that needed to be fixed, the PSP and GBA versions fix this exploit. Ugh. I mean, you could still attack yourselves in easy battles to spam magic and drain MP and raise your HP, but come on, it's still a long, tedious thing to sit through. You'd think these remakes would add things to speed up the process. Lower the amount of spells needed to be cast, give players the option to spam magic outside of battles to build them up like you can the Cure spell. Something! I don't care what version you're playing, this game is boring. But look, I'm done complaining. These are all my issues with Final Fantasy II. So let's talk about the positive stuff. The music's still great. Like the setting and characters themselves, Nobuo Uematsu composes an entirely new soundtrack and does a stand-up job as always. This game introduces a lot of concepts that would carry on with the series and help define it from your typical Dungeons & Dragons experience. We get our first introduction to Sid, a man who designs airships for travel to transport people across the world, for a fee of course. He's hanging around the town of Poft, and you can literally pay him to transport you to various cities if you don't feel like walking. Again, the map is so connected with everything that I never really felt the need to pay money for this, but if you're in a hurry, it's one option. Sid is but one of many Sids that will frequent the entire series. Another option for travel is to hitch a ride onto a chocobo! South of Castle Cassion is the Chocobo Forest, where you'll run into this giant yellow chicken who can be tamed to carry you across the land, all while a fun little jingle plays. And yeah, it loops that quickly. The Chocobo theme wouldn't be extended into the song we all know until Final Fantasy III. The pro of the Chocobo is that you don't get into random encounters while riding one, and it can actually carry you through the most dangerous places to the towns with the best weapons and magic. The con of the Chocobo is that there's only one spot to get one. There's only one forest, and it's in an area that is so out of the way it may as well not even be there. All the towns are west of the Chocobo Forest, and if I'm zipping around from place to place, I'm probably just going to use the pirate ship you acquire later. Why would I travel a longer distance so that I can use it to avoid battles and stuff? Again, the planning in this game is so weird compared to the first game. A lot of original Final Fantasy monsters got their start in number 2. Enemies like the destructive bombs, these fireball type guys who actually react very badly to being hit. If you start attacking one, you better kill it quick because it has the ability to self-destruct and deal out a ton of damage to your party. There's the Flans, these jello mold blob enemies who are actually super resistant to physical attacks. No matter your strength or the weapons you have, these guys shrug off attacks and usually only receive like 10 HP worth of damage. However, they're not impervious as they have one major weakness: magic. You can cast fire, ice, lightning, holy, meteor, whatever, and they will take huge amounts of damage. And there are dungeons and floors with tons of flan encounters, so yes, even if you hate the grinding, magic is essential for bosses and flans alike. One of the best moments in the story is when the Emperor manages to lock you inside his own personal coliseum, and his big trap to try and kill you is to unleash the Behemoth, this giant horned monster with high offense and defense. Even as recent as Final Fantasy XV, the Behemoth is usually one of the fiercest, scariest enemy types in the series, and it made its debut right here. And although you don't see it, at one point you're sailing around trying to get the Ultima spell when a whirlwind appears out of nowhere and sucks you in. It turns out this was the work of the sea creature Leviathan, who actually swallows your crew and forces you to fight monsters from inside. Final Fantasy II, Leviathan's Inside Story. The storyline of the game does a lot more with its characters than Final Fantasy I did. I mean, the first game was really basic. You played as nameless people and helped characters who only had like maybe 2 things to say max. But this time Final Fantasy really got the most out of the Famicom's text limitations and had characters saying tons of things. I mean, Princess Hilda has a lot to say. You're constantly coming back to her dozens of times whenever the situation changes. And there are kind of intricate relationships for an NES game. Like this guy, Prince Gordon. At first he starts off really weak and insecure. He doesn't think he can live up to his brother Scott, who was to be wed with Princess Hilda before the Empire made their attack. With Scott's death, Gordon spurns into action despite his insecurities, and with the party's help, he starts to understand what's important and gains the strength to lead the rebellion. He doesn't talk all that much, being an NES game, but you understand who he is and you get how these characters are suffering under the Empire's iron fist. People die. A lot of people die in Final Fantasy II. Like, one of the missions is to stop and sabotage this massive airship they've built to terrorize the kingdoms known as the Dreadnought. Unfortunately, our heroes are too late, and the Dreadnought manages to successfully take off. And the first thing it does after it hits the air is blow the shit out of tons of towns. The NPCs acknowledge that tons of people die because of the Dreadnought. Hilda's fiancé dies. Her father succumbs to the arrow wound and passes in his bed. The monk Joseph actually defends the party from a trapped boulder and gets crushed by it. You have to tell Joseph's wife and daughter that he's dead. There's a bleakness and a tragedy to Final Fantasy II, where things don't always work out for our heroes. The Emperor is as evil as Final Fantasy villains get, and causes mass pain and misery just because he can. He literally wipes out the Dragoons of Dice by poisoning their food. He ends up creating this giant tornado palace and actually wipes out 4 of the cities in the game. And this is for good. He just straight up erases towns that you can no longer visit, killing thousands and instilling fear and hopelessness into the rebels of Fynn. Eventually our heroes manage to take him down and it seems like everything is going to be fine. But that's when the Emperor just gets more power. So get this, our heroes manage to fight the Emperor and kill him. Like, he's dead. He is rotting in hell. And then, while in hell, the Emperor manages to pick a fight with Satan himself. He challenges the devil to a fight for ownership of the place. And he wins! The Emperor claims the throne of Castle Pandemonium, the Palace of Hell, and eventually becomes the King of Hell. And using his dark magic that summoned monsters from hell in the first place, he manages to bring Pandemonium into the living world and tries to kill everyone for good. This guy is a real bastard! Good God! Anywho, I'm getting a lot out of the plot, and while it is more than Final Fantasy I, it is still less than anything from Final Fantasy IV onwards. It still feels like an NES game in that people don't have too much to say, and you're never reading a novel in between gameplay segments. It does a good job establishing its world and laying on the thick tragedy and melodrama as more of your friends and allies die along the way. Is it a challenging game? Only when status effects enter the situation. Like, one of the roughest early bosses in the game is the Lamia Queen. Well, mainly because she has the ability to charm your party members and turn them on each other. There are magic spells to dispel charm and stone and poison and stuff, but all it takes is one good charm to wreck your teammates real quickly. And the thing about the Asuna spell is that even though it's supposed to cure any status ailment, it doesn't cure stone unless it's at level 5. Meaning you have to grind and cast that spell about 250 or so times before you can handle the cockatrices. Oh, and golden needles, which are items that can cure stone, are super expensive, so you're gonna have to grind. Fun! Otherwise, I don't find anything hard once you get the Berserk spell. The ability to raise your attack power makes bosses a lot more manageable, and even the big bad Emperor doesn't feel as powerful as he should be. I found the final boss fight rather easy, honestly, so it's not particularly super challenging. But yeah, guys, that's Final Fantasy II. Firion and his friends managed to kill the Emperor for good, and peace finally returns to the world. And my boredom finally ends. If you like Final Fantasy II, sorry I was super negative. I understand that this game was made in 1988, and video games were somewhat fresh and making up the rules as they went along. Of course most games from this era are dated and won't be up to the standards of today's gaming. But it is a stark contrast from the first game that had come out earlier that was so much better in every way. Like again, I'm surprised Final Fantasy I holds up as well as it does. But even the PlayStation update to the sequel is not nearly as good as the original game. It's got a great soundtrack, it introduces a lot of neat things into the series, and I like the concept of the level up system. It sounds like an interesting idea. It's just the execution that leaves a lot to be desired. There's not enough plot to make up for the tedious dungeon crawling, the ridiculous encounter rate, or the agonizingly slow busy work that enhancing your character's stats takes up. I haven't played the GBA or PSP versions, but I've seen enough wikis and playthroughs to know that they don't fix the game's shortcomings. They do add an extra campaign that doesn't exist in the Famicom or PlayStation releases, but no. I don't want more game, I want to stop playing it. I find it interesting that both the PlayStation and GBA versions come as part of a double feature. Like, Origins is both 1 and 2. Dawn of Souls is both 1 and 2. It seems like Square knew it was one of the weaker games, so rather than sell it on its own, they packaged it with the first game so people would try it anyway. Which is fine. Me? I'm just glad it's smooth sailing from here. Until we reach the HD games, anyway. Anywho, folks, come back next month as I look back at another game I've only played through one time. Final Fantasy III.